Grand opening, grand closing. Opportunity comes in many forms. There's the opportunity to achieve wealth, opportunity of employment, progressing in your career. And then there's also the opportunity to gain knowledge when a situation arrives, right? But if you don't notice these opportunities, you can lose out on them. And the opportunity to ever get them back again could be gone forever. But in this scenario or topic that I'm about to discuss, I'm presenting this video so that opportunity to gain knowledge or to learn something is not lost. And what I'm talking about is the knowledge and first-hand account of Mike Clark. Now, who's Mike Clark? As you can see from his Twitter profile, veteran game musician, audio designer and programmer, experienced voice actor, Psygnosis, creator of the Insidious Sid emulation plugin. Now, the Psygnosis is the important part. Now, you're probably already familiar with this whole conversation topic because it's been brought up primarily as a defense mechanism or protection with the whole argument of comparison with Microsoft acquiring ABK, but this is not what this video is about. It doesn't matter, right? This is the opportunity for knowledge. We're not going to get into console warring or arguing about consolidation. Is irrelevant. It's just simply learning from the first-hand account of what just happened, of what happened when Sony acquired Psygnosis. He provides a couple of statements. There's probably a lot more to it, but I think this is a great starting point, right? So it starts with this. There was a little conversation about the whole ABK deal, but then as soon as he stepped into the Twitter thread and Mike Clark started giving his first-hand account, that's when I saw opportunity. Everybody else tried to use his tweets to either align what they wanted. Again, they want to either win an argument or something. But instead of just sitting back and be like, oh, time out, let's just listen to the guy and just learn and appreciate that he's taking the time from something he personally experienced, right? Because everybody could pull information from the web with Google, Wikipedia, and, articles. And then you try to piece together, what happened, right? But that will never compare to someone who was actually there, right? Not relying on research, right? And any opportunity I could learn from somebody who has the experience and was in the fight, for lack of a better explanation, I will always take that over even something that I personally researched. So his account will always trump deep research because he was there, right? So we'll start off with this. He says this: I really don't want to go involved in this again. I don't really know who's arguing what anymore. Psygnosis was a large publisher with a large swath of demonstrable future technology when Sony bought us. Video compression, CD streaming, high-end graphics rendering. So, let's unpack that comment. That comment was just more, right? Some of their comments was, oh, it's the IPs or lemmings. But I would unpack from that statement that Sony saw something more than just games. They saw technology. CD streaming, high-end graphics renderings, compression. And this is around the time. Now, this was 1993. So this is around the time Sony was getting into gaming. Obviously, they're starting from scratch. Brand new from scratch. Has nothing really under the pipeline. So they're acquiring technologies and expertise to help them get in the right direction. So I see this as the Psygnosis purchase wasn't about owning the most powerful games or whatever. It was about technology that Sony can use and eventually build up their platform. So that's pretty interesting. The next one. Almost all games prior to Sony buyout were from third-party developers who often use our large in-house art team and possibly me for audio. We were predominantly an Amiga developer because that was by far the best machine technically. So it sounds like many third parties used their technologies to build games, and they were part of it. So technically, they were a publisher that supported the industry with technologies. Interesting. However, we supported all platforms where it made financial sense to do so. We had Atari ST and DOS versions of most games. We started supporting consoles in 1990. The impact of Lemmings in 1991 cannot be overstated, and it was released on every viable platform you can imagine. If you take into account the size of the industry at the time we were bought, our purchase was a big deal. And collectively, the entire game industry went, what? Why? Because we had an unfair reputation for having a lot of attractive games with poor gameplay. So now this is interesting. Because when you unpack this statement, when Sony bought Psygnosis, while they were large, it was a big deal because of their size, they may have been viewed as an actual bad purchase. Right? And in his opinion, the reputation they had was unfair. Meaning they had IPs, but they just not making good gameplay. So they're wondering why Sony would even bother. But again, if we go back to his first statement, Sony is what? They're into technology. They're into hardware. They understand technology. So maybe they saw something more than just the games and gameplay or whatever. They're like, we need that technology. So it's interesting that despite this being a big deal, industry looked at it as Sony probably didn't make the right choice. Interesting. What it did was signal that Sony was very serious about something to do with games. We basically had to teach Sony how to operate in the games industry. And in doing so, we became Sony Europe and set Sony US off in the right direction because they had no clue what they were doing. That's interesting. So Sony going into the gaming industry, they didn't really have the veterans. They didn't have the expertise. They needed someone. They needed someone to teach them and get them right so they could start going in the right direction, making the right decisions. And I have to say, Mike Clark, I applaud you and your staff because you clearly did them. You did a great job teaching because look where they're at now. So it's clear in hindsight, you did a phenomenal job being a mentor and letting Sony know. Now, what's interesting is from this statement, this tells me Sony was receptive to that training, to that mentorship, to that knowledge. You know, I can only imagine that they'd be like, nah, I think we do it this way. No, I think they were like, all right, this is what you think we do best. We'll follow that blueprint. Very interesting. But our relationship was a strange one. We were 100% owned by Sony, but were fiercely independent. Sony basically let us get away with murder by continuing to release on other platforms. Now, this is interesting because Sony purchased them in 1993, but they shut them down and created Sony Liverpool in 1999. So, based on what he's saying, you're talking Sony let them do what they want for 6 years. They made whatever they want and forever who they want for 6 years. Now, that doesn't sound a lot now, right? Because we now have 7th-year generations, maybe even 8 with this one potentially, right? But back then, 5 years was a console generation. You know, a console would come and go and the new one's here in 5 years. So that's a big deal for the 90s. Reading more. With regard to Sony killing Psygnosis, it's true, but not how it's being represented here. When we got full into PlayStation development, as Wipeout was starting to become a proper game, we had loads of NES, Mega Drive, PC, and other games canned. Some were really good. It is most definitely the case that Wipeout wouldn't exist without Sony. So saying outright that Sony killed Wipeout isn't true. You have to look at the time periods involved. Wipeout should still be large, successful franchise, so you could argue that Sony eventually killed it. Now what's interesting with that is when Sony decided to do shut down Psygnosis and do, I think it's Sony Liverpool, right? This was 1999. Now, think about the time frame. PlayStation 1 came out in 1995. So even 1995, 96, 97, that's when I think Final Fantasy and Metal Gear came out. 98. Those were pivotal years. And by that point, PlayStation 1 was knocking it out the park. So 99, Sony decided to put their foot down. I don't want to say put their foot down, but to really say, nah, you belong, your IPs, you're going to focus on PlayStation. And I think this is where they were prepping for the PlayStation 2. So I think that, and this is just my opinion, Sony allows Psygnosis to just have free reign for the first couple of years, because I think they were not in the position to not have them, to make them stop making multiplats. Because again, Sony's just beginning. I don't want to say Sony was kind-hearted or they really care for the gamers. I don't think it's any of that at all. I don't think it had anything to do with some type of moral, ethics, or emotional decision making. I think it was pure business. Sony just acquired them. They're just starting in gaming, right? And what they acquired is developers or publisher that makes money off of other systems. I don't think Sony was in a position to shut that down, because then they will absorb all that loss. You're talking about someone that was already created to support multiple platforms. You jump in, right? Unless you already have big bank to shut all that down and focus on you, you have to let them do what they do until you build yourself up in this game space. And I think that's all that was. I think Sony bought them, but let them still operate because it made financial sense, while Sony can actually get to the point where PlayStation is now making that money and they could pull them away. And I think that's all it was. And I think 1999 was the year PlayStation got big enough to where Sony's like, hey, PlayStation's making money. We don't need our developers to make multiplats anymore. Now it's time to cut that off. And in my opinion, I think that's all that was. Now, let's see. There was some other notes. Let me see if I could see something. Let's see. Let me find some. Let's see if there was some other stuff. Because, there was some other notes he said, but I think it was all part of conversation, right? Let's see. Okay, here's another one. He said, we released some kind of version of Wipeout on all of the viable platforms. We even had an arcade version in the works. And one programmer even worked for 3 months on a version for the Silicon Graphics Onyx workstation. But it definitely was the case that for a period of time, a year or so, after we got bought, we were PlayStation exclusive, and some games for other formats got canned. After that, though, we went back to publishing on multiple platforms. Let's see. Another point he made. It is very difficult to compare the game industry back then with what it is today. It's the largest entertainment medium now, and back then it was still the domain of the geeks. You can thank Psygnosis and EA Sports for opening the door for games to become mainstream. Nobody is really wrong in these arguments. While I would say that Psygnosis acquisition is easily as large as Bethesda acquisition in terms of industry impact, the fact is that the Bethesda purchase today has a much greater cultural impact due to the size of the industry. Let's see if he says anything else. I think that's it. And I think that's pretty much it, right? I would love, I'll be honest, I hardly get industry guests, but I would really love, I'm going to see if I can invite him if he would hop on. Because there's so many more questions specific to PlayStation, right? I would like to know who were the players, how did they respond? Was he privy to how PlayStation or the people at Sony responded to Nintendo and how they were treated? Was there any word or guidance? I would just love to know what he saw being there and all the reaction, right? Obviously he was there the day Nintendo did their thing? How did he react when he saw that? What was the company's reaction? What was everybody's reaction? Like, yo, what's going on? You know, there's so many questions, like opportunity, right? And guess what? I'm going to try to take the opportunity for this. So hopefully he responds back. I will completely understand if he doesn't really want to go to a podcast and talk to it. But for the sake of opportunity for knowledge, I would just love to see from firsthand experience at that time what he saw in everything with PlayStation, right? And I would love to ask him, is there anything you see or know about PlayStation today that they still do because of what you taught them and they kept that strategy? You know, there's just so many things, right? So we'll see if I could get any luck for Tuesday's podcast. You know, 60 frames, no lag, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. I will let you know. But I would truly love to just get more insight on that one. But anyway, let me know what you think. This is your only friend is YouTube Streets PorterRock77. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Hit the like button. And I'll see you Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, 60 frames, no lag. And hopefully, Mr. Mike Clark will be there to give us some amazing insight. So, Mike, if you're listening, I want to take this opportunity to gain this knowledge because it's a treasure trove. And it has to be archived. It's got to be on video. We got to have it. This is amazing. Anyway, you guys take care. Have a good one. Peace.